Namaste. Namaste. The God in me greets the God in you. 10 years ago, I began writing I didn't know it was a book. I was going to present a paper at a closed group of out-of-the-box deviant thinkers that Martha and I belong to. And a year later, I presented the paper. It was a 148-page paper where I predicted an economic collapse. A rendering was going to happen to the United States and the world economy. It's doing all sorts of things, blah, 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 blah. And since then, I've given talks in Europe, Australia, sometimes in the United States. I've been interviewed, Russia TV interview with these other people on debt. And I've looked a lot about economic problems and what's happened in the United States. And in this 148-page book, never once did I come across that illegal aliens were responsible for Mexico. Be that as it may, what Donald Trump has found is not unique to the United States. Hitler used it in Germany. I'm majored in political science, so I've done some reading about what happened. In the late 1890s, Bismarck went on a rearmament thing. The world went on, and they went from off the gold standard to paper, because it's a lot easier to gear up for war when you're spending paper rather than hard-earned gold. And all hell broke loose literally in 1917 with the First Great World War. And the Germans blamed the Jews for what happened after the war. Recently, in Israel, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu made the statement that the Palestinians were responsible for the Holocaust, not necessarily Hitler. Now, I've done a bit of reading. I know the role of Palestinians and of the Germans and the Jews, and it seemed to me the same furrow was being plowed. A furrow that brings up sort of extraordinary rewards on this planet. Now to explain it, everybody has an explanation for these things, but I want to bring your attention to something more of local matter. Sort of like local produce, it's the big phase now. You go down to Wild Oats and this is local tomato or local canned product. I don't think they say that far, but it's all local. Well, the local insight I want to bring to your attention is of a Yaqui Indian. The Indians in this area and in northern Mexico were known as the Yaquis. And in 1960, an anthropology graduate student from UCLA was at the Greyhound bus depot in Nogales, which is an hour and a half from here. The next time I go to Nogales to get my teeth fixed, I'm going to go to that bus station. Because in there, he wrote about, he met this gentleman, Juan Matus, later known to us as Don Juan. Don was a term of respect. And what happened as a result of this, over the next few years, 4 decades, Carlos Castaneda was to write 12 books about his experiences with Don Juan, which were only 13 years in distance, from 1960 to 1973. They stole 28 million copies. Rather astounding. I remember reading this in the early 70s. And this was a period of time when the world was opening, I think, to much of us here in this room. The 70s, light came in, shedding new points of view on the past and on the present, even perhaps in the future. I remember in 1970 I read Autobiography of a Yogi. There's bilocation, Sri Yukteswar was here, then he was there, and what he talked about. And I remember putting the book down and I thought, man, he's either lying or he's telling the truth. And I had the feeling Paramahansa Yogananda was telling the truth. That book had an effect on me. I became a vegetarian. Our restaurant became a vegetarian. We went broke the next year. Such were the times. But my path took me in another direction for the next 4 decades, though I remembered those books. And only recently, when reintroduced to them by now Reverend Howard Millich, I remember when Martha and I were shopping at 17th Street Market, and we run into the guy who was, when people came to Tucson, I used to take them to this store. It had every food on the planet. And I worried, how could you turn this inventory in a town like Tucson? And here was this guy who was just ordering, it was like a Disneyland for food. And we began talking. And what we found out, we shared an intense focus on the path of truth and enlightenment that came back from the 1960s. Well, 2 months ago, now Reverend Howard Milwich gave to now Reverend Martha and Darrell Schoon a copy, 2 copies of Carlos Castaneda's books. I want to read something because his teachings are very foreign to most people. I mean, we come through a Western consciousness and we'll believe that Jesus turned water into wine, perhaps in Judea, and we won't believe something that Carlos Castaneda, that Don Juan told us. And let me tell you, it's just a matter of repetition and agreement. Like I've told friends of mine, I am sure that if I were alive in the Middle Ages, I would have absolutely believed the earth was flat. Just like, for the same reasons, I absolutely believe that the earth is round. My focus on it and understanding of it is the same now as it was then. 0. It's merely the prevailing thought form, the prevailing agreement, which we share in our common mind. But let me read something, which is one of the reasons why people really had a hard time, and I had a hard time of accepting what Carlos Castaneda said that Don Juan told him. This is from The Fire Within, and he writes here. Don Juan described his group as seers. They saw things. Carlos called them sorcerers because that's how the Yaqui Indians called them, Don Juan and his group. But Don Juan, they didn't say themselves as sorcerers. He didn't like the word. He said, we're seers. We see things. And one of the things he said, the seers could see us. They saw us as we are, but they also saw us as beings of light. We were unique in the universe. Human beings were. We had a covering of light. We were born with a covering of light. I'll return to this later. But what he was talking about seeing, he said, which is awareness. What do you see? Awareness is your ability to see. I hope and I know that your awareness now is not what it was when it was 5 years old. And when it was 7, it wasn't what it was 5. And it was 15, it wasn't what it was 7 and 30 and 40 and so on. It's constantly changing. Yet the egoic part of the mind always believes it's right. No matter what you believe, no matter what you've got in that file folder, you may have just changed it the day before. And you'll defend that belief, that new thought, with all the passion and fire and belief, probably even more so because it's new, than you had in your previous beliefs. That's the mind. But this is what Don Juan was telling me. He said, it's the seer's conviction that we've tapped a very small portion of ourselves. He immersed himself in thought for a while as if he were trying to decide what to say next. Then he smiled. He's talking about Don Juan. The first truth about awareness, as I have already told you, is that the world out there is not really as we think it is. We think it is a world of objects, and it is not. The truth is that the world is as it looks, and yet it isn't. It's not as solid and real as our perception has led us to believe, but it isn't a mirage either. The world is not an illusion, and unreal on the other. Pay close attention to this, for it must be understood, not just accepted. We perceive. This is a hard fact. But what we perceive is not a fact of the same kind, because we learn what to perceive. Something out there is affecting our senses. This is the part that is real. The unreal part is what our senses tell us that is what is there. Take a mountain, for instance. Our senses tell us that it is an object. It has size, color, form. We even have categories of mountains, and they're downright accurate. Nothing wrong with that. The flaw is simply that it has never occurred to us that our senses play only a superficial role. Our senses perceive the way they do because a specific feature of our awareness forces them to do so. Forces them to do so. We are cognitive beings thinking we are in control of our cognition. We are people holding an awareness believing our awareness is the result of neutral thinking thoughts that have somehow come together and we've sifted through and found what's true. Don Juan tells Carlos Castaneda, we are forced. The cognition that we hold has been forced upon us. Let me backstep about cognition and the real world out there. On April 16th, 2016, what is that, 2 months ago? In Quantum magazine, cognitive scientist Daniel Hoffman says, our perceptions of an independent reality is an illusion. This is the man out of MIT, studying artificial intelligence, Stanford, he's now at Berkeley. And he says, this is what science has come and told us, irrefragably, whether you accept it, believe it or not, that the world that you think that is solid doesn't exist as you think it does. The world presented to us by our perceptions is nothing like reality. Quantum physicists marvel at the strange fact that quantum systems don't seem to be definite objects localized in space until we come along to observe them. Experiment after experiment has shown, defying common sense, that if we assume that the particles that make up ordinary objects have an objective, observer-independent existence, we get the wrong answers. The central lesson of quantum physics is clear. There are no public objects sitting out there in some pre-existing space. As the physicist John Wheeler put it, useful as it is under ordinary circumstances to say that the world exists, quote unquote, out there, independent of us, that view can no longer be upheld. We've been shaped to have perceptions. Shaped. Don Juan uses the word forced. We have been shaped to have perceptions that keep us alive, so we have to take them seriously. If I see something that I think of as a snake, I don't pick it up. If I see a train, I don't step in front of it. I've evolved these symbols to keep me alive, so I have to take them seriously. But it's a logical flaw to think that if we have to take it seriously, we also have to take it literally. Physics tells us that there are no public physical objects. And Don Juan warns us about taking our awareness and perceptions seriously. He said the fact that we accept our perceptions and cognitive reality as serious and real is what gets us into trouble. It is what causes us to judge something out there as being causal for all the problems that we have in our lives and on our planet. I used to joke in the 60s that there was a popular song where, it ain't me, babe. No, it ain't me. And the other side of that was, I'm looking for someone to blame. I'm looking for someone. Oh, it ain't me, babe. No. I'm looking for someone to blame. What joins everybody on this planet at a superficial level, we know what joins us together at a substantive level is our connection with the source, with God, with all that is. But what joins us at a superficial level is the belief, is the knowledge that something is wrong in our existence. What we deduce from that, each and every one of us assumes that something is in fact wrong in our world. But each and every one of us goes to the next step and says, well, it's somebody out there that did it to me. It's somebody out there that's a cause of our problems, either collectively or individually. That is what we call human nature. Don Juan does not call it human nature. Don Juan says we are magical beings that have been reduced to mere fodder by what he calls the foreign installation. Now let me talk to you about how he gets into the foreign installation. This comes from The Active Side of Infinity. This is the last book that Carlos Castaneda wrote before he passed away in 1998. And in it, it's sort of not, it's the same story, but his point of view is different because he's had 40 years to live through after this information came to him. Much like it is, my point of view is different than when I first read it. Very, very different. So here we go. This is how he steps into it. And he brings up the subject. Carlos Castaneda was making excuses for his life, explaining why he couldn't do things, explaining why it wasn't the way he wanted it to be. And Don Juan said to him, "It's not the people around you who are at fault. They cannot help themselves. The fault is with you, because you can help yourself. But you are bent on judging them at a deep level of silence." He told Carlos Castaneda that his problems were not caused by other people outside, but in himself, because he had a deep desire to judge. He goes on, "Any idiot can judge. If you judge them, you will only get the worst out of them. All of us human beings are prisoners. And it is that prison that makes us act in such a miserable way. Your challenge is to take people as they are. Let people alone." To which Carlos Castaneda responded, "You're wrong on this, Don Juan. Believe me, I have no interest in judging them or entangling myself with them in any way." Don Juan answered, "You do understand what I'm talking about. If you're not conscious of your desire to judge them, you are in even worse shape than I thought." Don Juan explained where this came from. He said it is not a part of human nature. It has been forced upon us from an outside source. That seers knew that we were connected to the source and that we glowed with light. But there was an outside consciousness, a source that had come into humanity and lived off of us and reduced us to the level of the lowest common denominator of humanity, of me. Where the only thing that was really moving in humanity, except for the very, very few, was a form of self-consciousness. A self-consciousness that did not identify with a great being of which it was a part or reality, but a consciousness that only identified with its beliefs, its judgments, its anger, its problems. That's what has happened to humanity. Sorcerers discovered we have a companion for life. We have a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our Lord and Master. It has rendered us docile and helpless. If we want to protest, it suppresses our protest. If we want to act independently, it demands that we don't do so. But how can they do this, Don Juan, I asked, somehow angered by what he was saying. Do they whisper all that in our ears while we're asleep? Sorcerers, this is what he said before, sorcerers believe that the predators have given us our system of beliefs, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They are the ones who set up our hopes and expectations of dreams of success or failure. They have given us covetous, greed, and cowardice. It is the predators who make us complacent, routine, and egomaniacal. Don Juan said he was upset at this. So he said, well, how do they do this? How do they do this to us? Do they whisper in our ears? And Don Juan said, no, they don't do it that way. That's idiotic. They are infinitely more efficient and organized than that. In order to keep us obedient and meek and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of a fighting strategist. A horrendous maneuver from the point of view of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind. Do you hear me? The predators gave us their mind, which became our mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute now. Even though you have never suffered hunger, you have food anxiety, which is none other than the anxiety of the predator, who fears that at any moment now its maneuver is going to be uncovered and its food is going to be denied. Through the mind, which after all is their mind. The predators inject themselves into human beings, into their lives, whenever it is convenient for them. And they ensure in this manner a degree of security to act as a buffer against their fear. He went on to say that when that sense of self gets upset and flagged, when we fight with others, when we contest what's going on in that reality, when we blame others, when we judge others, the predators live off that energy. The predators suck that from us. And we are unconscious of it because of how clear this has happened. I remember when I was reading this, I thought Don Juan was sort of mean, the way he treated Carlos Castaneda. And I want to tell you here how this book starts, because he starts about it. Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda said he drove down to see Don Juan, and he was sitting there and he was so tired he leaned against the walls, this little shack that Don Juan was living in, a shack that Don Juan told him, he says, "You think I live here?" He goes, "No, I'm only here because it's where I meet you. This shack is shabby, just like you are." All right? And Carlos Castaneda goes, "What?" And he found out later, Don Juan lived in a big house in southern Mexico. But this was not meant to do him damage. This was not meant, if someone told you that. I mean, in this part of the story, he sits there and he sits down, he leans against the wall, and he slipped off the box, and the house shook because he banged against the wall. And Don Juan said, "Boy, people who are overweight, it really causes things to happen." All right? And he sat up and he's looking uptight like this. Don Juan said that not to insult Carlos Castaneda, but to make him aware of his sense of self. The me that gets hurt. For 10 years he went after that me. Not to hurt him, but to make him aware of his identification with a false self. And let me assure you, if someone does that to you, or if you do that to yourself, the motive is not liberation. The motive is far deeper than that. It's the predator's motive to keep us enslaved. Don Juan passed away, and Carlos Castaneda passed away in 1998. It was an amazing thing. I've looked at these books again. You can see I found a lot to be interested in. But things have changed since he passed away. It doesn't change the truth of what he says. It changes our experience of those truths. We are moving into the Aquarian age. The age of the predator darkness is over. It came with that age itself. Don Juan even said that predator had a use in the universe with humanity. It was what the universe used to test us against ourselves. It used the predator's consciousness, to fight out of the morass in which we had become entrapped. It forced Rex to find out, holy smokes, every time I feel attacked, I can do something about it. I can forgive. And you did that out of necessity, Rex. You didn't read it out of a book. In fact, your story, when you got up here and he said what had happened to him, he had already come to the realization, and then he said he was in Los Angeles and something happened, which must have been tremendous, horribly. He felt diminished. He felt like he was nothing. And then he said the next time he was wandering around, the next couple of days he goes, "Oh, I've been offended. That's the problem." And once Rex realized he'd been offended, he knew that he had to forgive. That his forgiveness was the only thing that get him out of where he found himself. Not to beat the shit out of the guy who offended him. Though if you'd been given that opportunity, you might have taken it. But you weren't. And so this has been set up to test us. But what I've also found out is that this phase is passing. This is passing. But we still must do the work to clean it up in our own personal lives. There was this group of channelings from Aisha North. They were from 2011 to 2014. I used to read them every morning or every day. It was like the subtitle of that incredible period of the 11-11, this period of tremendous change and transition. Aisha North is a Norwegian girl, and she heard these channelings from a group called the Constant Companions. And the first thing I remember, they came in and told her, said, "You are worried about your home planet. You are worried if it's going to survive what is happening to us." And they said, "We are here to tell you, don't worry about your home planet. Worry about yourselves." The planet's survival is guaranteed. Yours is not. And what went on was a subtitle to what went on, and they stopped in 2014 because we had successfully made it through this transition period where they were sent to hold our hands. And I want to tell you, these are some readings from it, and this is what they told her. Human societies have been corrupted by a later influx of other intelligence. Intelligence that has been used to manipulate humans to such a scale they have all but forgotten their own origins. When I say the God in me greets the God in you, it is out of an affirmation and a wish that it is. It may be fact, but the part of me that is saying it to you doesn't totally believe it. It sort of believes it and wants to believe it, but it doesn't totally believe it. You as a collective have been taken back to the Dark Ages. So instead of developing further into contact with us, who are the intergalactic beings, or other beings that are not incarnated on this planet, you have been kept deliberately in the dark and seemingly left to your own devices. Nothing could be further from the truth, as you have no time been left alone, not by us, and certainly not by those dark forces who have been controlling you for these last centuries. They have almost succeeded in wiping out all traces of ancient memories, memories from the time when you were all connected closely to the source. But some vestiges remain, and now those seeds have been awakened again. The knowledge that you have been kept in the dark for so long has finally seeped out and is spreading like wildfire. Even if the dark ones have tried as hard as they could, even in their stronghold on your souls have finally lost their grip. Their grip on your souls have finally been loosened. And now the truth will come out in the open for all to see. It will be a momentous day indeed, but for many it will be the worst day of their lives. The reason for this is easy to understand, as many will have a hard time digesting the fact that they've been kept as slaves in a system to benefit a few chosen few, destroying the planet and the lives that live upon it in order for these few men and women to live a life in absolute luxury, while almost half the population on the planet is living in poverty, war, and terror. Now the time has come for humanity to open their eyes and face the truth, no matter how grim it seems. For remember, you also will see the light again, for the first time in a very, very long time. And believe us when we say that the light has returned and cannot be turned away yet again. Namaste, the God in me greets the God in you.